We closed our discussion last time with the Upanishadic movement, when the Upanishads were composed and when devotees began to imagine the sacrifice made in the yagna as an internalized sacrifice. Remember the yagna, that's the fire sacrifice of the Vedic period. And they, in the Upanishadic movement, began to imagine it as internalized, as an internalized sacrifice, as something at work within the individual. It was a highly speculative era when philosophical debates were held in the public arena, and when spiritually inclined seekers began to move into the forest to study with and learn from a guru. And we'll see that out of this era, yoga also developed. But I'll set that aside until the final lecture, and today turn to the tradition of bhakti that developed in the 4th to the 6th centuries CE. Now, in India, under the Gupta dynasty or the Gupta Empire, Hinduism really re-emerged as the dominant religious tradition of South Asia. We'll turn to Buddhism in the next unit, but I'll mention it just briefly here to say that Buddhism was born in India in the 5th century BCE, and for centuries, especially under the Maurya Empire and its emperor Ashoka, Ashoka the Great, it was Buddhism that dominated the Indian religious landscape. So with the Guptas, in the early centuries of the Common Era, Hinduism regains its religious primacy in the geographical context of India. Now, the primary defining characteristic of this period is its theism. Cultural expressions of bhakti flowered. Theism, or you can see that's the root for God. Lots of gods going on. Now, what is this bhakti I'm talking about? Prothero talks about it a bit. It's most commonly translated as, we'll get there in a second, it's most commonly translated as devotion. Another way to translate it, though, is focused love. It involves devotees honoring, worshiping their chosen deities with an outpouring of affection, an overflow of love. We'll spend the next 2 lectures talking about some of the major figures on whom devotees focus this love, about the popular pantheon of Hindu devotionalism. But first, a bit about the early development of this popular devotionalism, or bhakti. The deities who were most often the object of bhakti were introduced through narratives, and here we go, known as the Puranas, which were developed between the 3rd and the 7th centuries, or the 4th and the 7th centuries CE. So after the Vedas, after the Upanishads, India begins to produce these stories, which are to this day considered scripture by most Hindus. The word Purana means ancient, as in ancient lore, or timeless mythic expressions of truth. There are 18 great Puranas, which are together often referred to as the 5th Veda. That category of the so-called 5th Veda sometimes also includes within it the 2 great epics of India, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which we'll talk a bit about next time, and which were composed during roughly the same historical period, and did something of the same thing. They told stories of the gods. These were all post-Vedic texts, which sing the graces of specific gods and specify their forms of worship. They are much more influential than the original 4 Vedas, though they were never codified for the same kind of scripted ritual use. These are popular tales, not stories owned or managed by the spiritual elites, the scholar priests known as Brahmins. The Puranas began as oral, told and retold in community contexts. Then, over time, they were written down in both Sanskrit and vernacular versions. Vernacular just is a word that refers to the common spoken language of a community. These texts assert the existence of 300 million gods, and I recommend to you a video called The Long Search, 330 Million Gods, available in the HSU library in VHS form, which is great. The heroes of these stories are exemplary models of devotional faith, of bhakti. Now, Puranic theism wasn't entirely new with the Puranas. It was there in the Upanishads, though not as central. And it was there in the epics, as you've seen in your reading from tradition for this unit, which is a chapter from the Bhagavad Gita, itself an excerpt from the larger epic of the Mahabharata. Again, we'll do it next time. So it wasn't exactly new, but Puranic theism, or bhakti, really took off during the classical and medieval period. Now, during this period, over the course of centuries, 3 basic traditions emerged, each defined by the deity identified as the one supreme, from which all other gods and goddesses emanate. Here you can see the 3. Those who honor Vishnu above all others are known as Vaishnavas. Those who elevate Shiva above all other gods are known as Shaivites. And those who worship the great goddess, Devi or Mahadevi, are known as Shaktas. These 3 dominate Puranic literature and are the focus of Hinduism from the classical age to the modern times. In the rest of this lecture, we'll begin our introduction of some of these gods, which again will continue next time, but we'll start here with what's classically known as the Trimurti, or the triple form. Before I go on, though, I'll mention a point that Prothero makes. This is the group classically known as the Trimurti, but the quote-unquote real Trimurti, or as Prothero calls them, or the three forms that actually form the center of devotional practice, are the three we just looked at: Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi, or Mahadevi, or Shakti, the goddess. That's who devotees actually pay attention to. And the difference here between the two groups, the two Trimurtis, is an interesting one. Devi, a kind of generalized goddess, one who can take on multiple aspects or personae, has attracted a great deal of devotionalism. And this can remind us of a point made in an earlier lecture that running through Hinduism is an inclination to balance energies. The worship of the goddess acts as something of a cultural counterbalance to the worship of the very male figures of Vishnu and Shiva. And the other side of that difference between the classic Trimurti, what we see here, and what Prothero calls the real Trimurti, what's actually organizes devotional practice, is also interesting. Why ditch Brahma? In a cultural context shaped and steeped in the Abrahamic traditions, the one we live in, the creator God plays an enormous part, right? Science classrooms and Supreme Courts all over the U.S. are even today engaged in debates about creation and what role it should play in our education and the shaping of our values. But here, Brahma, the creator, he gets hardly any devotional attention, attracts hardly any worship. And we can think of this in this way. In this context where creation, maintenance, and destruction, or transformation, are understood to be manifested in three separate figures, it's maintenance and transformation that human life is most concerned with. Creation already happened, right? It's done. But the maintenance of this cosmos and the experience of ceaseless transformation that characterizes life, these are challenges in the context of spirituality. They are constant and very real concerns of human worshippers. Creation isn't. So Brahma sort of falls out. So that's really all I'll say about Brahma, and we'll concentrate for the rest of this lecture on the figure on the right side of the image, Shiva. Brahma is the one on the left side of the image. We're going to go to the far right side of the image and look at Shiva. Here's a classic representation of Shiva with a lot going on, and we'll talk about some but not all of the features of this image. We can see that there's a puja offering of fruit in front of the seated, meditatively calm figure of Shiva. Also in front of him is this mound. We'll see these at the end of today's lecture, what's known as a Shiva Lingam, or a Shiva Linga, and on it there are three horizontal stripes. These are the Shaivite mark and are often seen on the foreheads of Shaivites, or Shiva devotees. Now, Shiva's name means auspicious, kind, gracious, right? But he's the destroyer or transformer, the one who sort of tills the soils of life, shakes things up so that creation and growth and change can happen. His name's a little bit of a euphemism, a way of calling him something nice, or using a sort of subtle flattery in the hopes of directing his transformative powers kindly towards one's own life, one's own community. Tilling the soil is great. Shaking things up, anybody who's done any farming or gardening knows this. You've got to till the soil. It's great. It's great for the flowers. It's great for the fruit. But it's not great for the worms, And so you want Shiva's transformative energy to be directed towards you in a way that doesn't disrupt your life, as tilling the soil might disrupt the life of, worms, bugs, moles, all that. It can be destructive. Now, a couple of other things to note here. Shiva is a real deity of paradoxes. He's in the meditative pose and sitting on the animal skin of the renunciant. And he is a renunciant, but we'll see that he's also a householder, or somebody who lives in a home with a wife and maintains that life. He has both creative and destructive energies. He's extraordinarily calm, but also extraordinarily powerful. The snakes in this image indicate something of this latent power. They represent the kundalini, the unmanifest energy in every person, and Shiva's unmanifest energy is alert, always. It's fully realized. It's ready to act. And he has a drum in one hand with which he beats out the rhythm of transformation, the rhythm of this changing universe. And the spout of water coming from his dreadlocks is the Ganges River. This sacred river was given to the human community by the gods, but the force of its crashing to earth from the heavens would have obliterated the world as we know it. It was so sacred and so powerful. So in a move of self-sacrifice and spiritual strength, Shiva stood below it to soften with his dreadlocks its fall to earth. So that's why you see that. Now, the next image, we're going to move on. The next image is a very popular form. You've probably seen it, and we'll see a few versions of it here. It is Shiva dancing out the song of transformation, destroying what's here to make way for something new, and doing so within the fiery circle of this samsaric universe. He dances on top of a figure representing ignorance, a false attachment to the material universe as somehow ultimately real, which in this context it's understood not to be. And then in this form, Shiva is known as the Nataraj or Nataraja, the Lord of the Dance. And here we take a little digression through the dance into, again, that balance of energies that is so prevalent in Hindu myth and practice. Shiva's consorts, the women, are understood to be the source of his creative energy. They allow for his dynamic, vibrant extension into the universe. They allow for that creative tension out of which creation grows. And a symbolic expression of his union with them is a common form in which he is worshipped. So what we see here is Shiva and Shakti, half and half. And this is the balance of energies dancing together, dancing out the rhythm of the universe. And here's a slightly more erotic version of the same symbol. Shiva in erotic embrace with a consort. This is a popular sculptural form. And reminds us again of something we saw in our first lecture, that this is not a tradition that shies away from nudity or sex. But back to the dance. We'll meet Ganesh, the elephant god, in the next lecture, but what we see here is Ganesh in the form of the Nataraja, the Lord of the Dance. Now, Ganesh is Shiva's son, so that connection is already there, but I include this image to highlight one more time that there's a lot of shape-shifting in this tradition. One god taking on the form of another or melding with another. There's a real fluidity of expression within Hinduism, a sense of freedom with form that's really unique to India and that this points to. And here's a Newsweek cover from 2010 where President Obama is pictured in the form of the Nataraja. It's not clear that Newsweek really made the effort to think through the cultural and spiritual history of this form, but it does seem to me to work. Sort of. They're playing not only on what they see as the inflated expectations put on the modern presidency, but also on the political need in the contemporary world to destroy a lot of what's going on and what's no longer productive in order to open the way for creative transformation. So, there you have it. Nataraja in the popular American press as a mode of political and social commentary. And the last thing that we'll look at today is the Shivalingam. Or it's often Shivalinga, the non-anthropomorphic form in which Shiva is worshipped. We've seen it once before in our first lecture. Definitely a phallic form, and in the upper right and upper left images, the lingam is set inside a yoni, or a vulvic form. So you've got both a male and a female represented here. In the top middle image, what you see is just the lingam, and these are pocket-sized. Devotees often carry them around or keep them on a home altar. They're convenient and they're easy. In the bottom left, you see a devotee, we've seen this once before, but you see here a devotee pouring milk over a Shiva lingam, common devotional practice. And on the right, what you see is a naturally formed ice lingam in the Amaranth Cave. It's melting, by the way. So there's quite a bit of environmental debate going on right now about that, and you can look that up. And here finally is an image from Nepal of the common sort of devotionalism that one sees around the Shiva lingam. It's easy, it's fruits, flowers, grains, whatever. And that ease, the simplicity of the structure is one of the reasons why this form of devotionalism is so popular. It's accessible, and you don't have to be rich, and you don't have to travel far to do it. So next time we'll turn our attention to more of the Pantheon and close up that aspect of our lecture.